Welcome to our Cybertalks interview series. I'm Wyatt Cash on behalf of CyberScoop, and I'm here today with Doug Song, VP and General Manager at Cisco and co-founder of Duo Security. Doug, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's good to see you, Wyatt.
First, I'd like to ask, there's been a lot thrown at Chief Information Security Officers in 2020. How have you seen 2020 changing or modifying the role of the CISO today?
It's interesting. I reflect on a couple things. One, we actually had our security leader at Duo, Mike Hanley, actually elevate to become the CISO of all of Cisco. And other than his predecessor's retirement, which was well-deserved, I think one of the reasons for his selection, an elevation really to the top of the company, was because of the work we've done at Duo in building a more inclusive security culture and environment. And I think that's sort of the shift I think many of us have gone through in 2020, as you've all had to think about, as all workers have become remote workers, how we build a culture of digital inclusion, right? Meeting people where they are and trying to enable them to be successful and safe in a time where, COVID has really disrupted pretty much everything. And so I think if we think about the CISO role, it's always been a mix of policy, technology, and so forth. But I think in this era, it really is thinking as much about how to protect people as much as systems and ensure, again, that they can actually be successful with pathways to success that you can create for them as a security leader.
Well, workforces, as you know, are now so much more distributed than they were just months ago. What concepts do you believe have helped CISOs with that shift between zero trust and two-factor authentication and many others? What do you see emerging as the most helpful tools for CISOs?
Sure. I think conceptually, as we've all been basically pushed into broadening access for many of our employees, concepts like zero trust provide ways in which we can help tailor that access correctly. And so in dealing with a workforce that is, again, much more broad, right, than it's ever been, not just because of COVID, but because of shifts in our business, right? Partners, contractors, consultants, vendors, but also shifts in the workplace environment. Not just the fact that we're out of many of our workplaces, but even preceding that, the introduction of BYOD and IoT devices and other platforms not complete within our control, or our workloads, right? Increasingly going cloud and so forth. We've had a very different set of challenges to really solve for in security than anything we've had to think about previously. And so I think, zero trust is really, as a concept, help deal with a lot of these things. And what that means in the workforce environment, for instance, is, 2FA, verifying the identity of your users, SSO, making sure that you can sell that additional security by providing the convenience of only having to do it once, maybe a week or even a month. Replacing, for instance, full tunnel VPN access, which gives remote employees full access to the entire network, with really tailored access to only applications they need with identity-aware proxies, or other sort of, security is really based on behavioral monitoring. These are the kind of things I think make security for end users simpler, more convenient, but also provide the organization much more flexibility in terms of how it actually enables work to be done. And so anyways, I think zero trust as a concept is something that is seeing a lot more traction with lots more organizations. They try to wrap their arms around, again, all these shifting dynamics in their workplace.
Well, you mentioned IoT, and speaking of IoT and other emerging technologies, particularly 5G now, continuing to come online in the United States, that obviously means more technology being brought in-house to handle various improvements. But with those improvements, obviously, come some supply chain concerns as well. How should enterprises collectively handle those concerns, and while still trying to make sure we don't fall behind in these emerging technologies?
That's a good question. Third-party risk these days is much harder to govern in this fast-changing and dynamic IT environment than it's ever been. And I really think that today's enterprise security policies have to defend against what are really ecosystem threats, given the quickly expanding audit scope as you've outlined, right? 5G and IoT, the network and internet-enabled devices are basically all around us and everywhere, kind of like air or water. And in particular, I think vendor risk management is an area of particular concern. So I think there are kind of three ways maybe to think about how, as a community, we really deal with this. The first is around better standards. The second is around better architecture, and the third maybe around better ways to evaluate our success. And so around the first and better standards, we're seeing federal industry standards moving quickly to help govern that Wild West, right? NIST 800-171 for the extended ecosystem that really services the federal government helps provide, in effect, enterprise security standards for this extended enterprise that is your supply chain. This 800-207, zero trust architecture, I think is actually one of the best ways to address that. The architectural principles for securing access in a modern organization environment, for instance, by ensuring posture checks before granting access, ensuring you have a full inventory of resources and hygiene of those resources and so forth. But really, as an industry, I think more support for initiatives like a friend of mine, Peter Zatko, formerly known as Mudge, over at DARPA. He has a new cyber independent testing lab who's scoring of software and systems based on code hygiene, safety features, code complexity, and what he calls crash testing, or what hackers call fuzzing, provided a new way, I think, to reason about the safety of the technologies we're having deployed in our environments in ways that I hope one day become much more standard in terms of our ability to assess. And so I think overall, as we see, all these technologies, rapidly envelop our environments and organizations, I think the trickle B of standards and some of our practices in terms of evaluation can really keep up or even get ahead, right, of some of what's happening. And so I encourage, those in industry and particularly those in the government to help really with some of the efforts to standardize the look at that.
Well, lastly, as cyber threats continue to grow in sophistication, organizations of all kinds face a persistent challenge in recruiting skilled cybersecurity professionals that, are capable of protecting their systems against these threats. So how do you recommend we close some of these gaps in terms of skills and also the nation's current cybersecurity education and training landscape as well?
It's a big question, and a tall order. I think we're short, 2 million such folks by some measures. Well, I think the first is really starting with the realization that technical literacy really is just literacy, and ensuring that we close the gap on the digital divide at home as the world becomes increasingly interconnected and reliant, I think is essential. And so I think our schools have a critical role to play in ensuring that we have a digital inclusive future for all, and starting from early education. I think with all the STEM education and initiatives that we see in the world today, how they lead into a cybersecurity sort of opportunity, I think is sort of the other gap that we have, though, that we need more opportunities for folks to play around and safely and ethically, right, with these opportunities. One day I think red teaming and blue teaming will be the new cops and robbers, and giving people safe opportunities to learn from that kind of role play. And in security, there's so many roles, right? It's not just those attackers and defenders, but there's also auditors, right? There's also policy folks and so forth. And it gives folks, I think, an opportunity to help them envision work in our industry. I think, my wife's high school career in Model UN, right, and doing that kind of work. And I wonder sometimes, if we can't find those kind of intersections in our industry around how people from, policy and legal and so forth, as well as, human factors engineering and design can come together, because security really is a team sport, and we have to work together to accomplish these goals. I think some of the things I've seen that are really encouraging are things like, folks are probably well familiar with the CCDC, or the Cyber Collegiate Defense Competition, for example, but maybe less familiar to folks are the historical online hacking platforms, or game platforms, if you will. There used to be a bunch of these, Pull the Plug and some of these others, Hack in the Box, and these kinds of platforms were ways in which people could try their hand and skills at making progress through learning cybersecurity in a very practical way, but in a way that also wasn't legal, right? So I think that's going to be crucial. And maybe the last part there I'll just note is, increasingly more and more, we need to make our knowledge and insights derived over decades of cybersecurity much more accessible than they have been. I think back in the earlier era of this industry, when folks were coming out of, for instance, maybe hacking as a hobby, only elites, so-called elites, were deserving of the secret knowledge, right, of a lot of these techniques and so forth. And these days, we have certifications, right, that are, I think, are increasingly more meaningful to individuals and to organizations. Cisco, as an employer and as a vendor, is actually a case in point. Cisco has these DevNet certifications, which are training toward a certified sort of certification that actually does hold water in the broader industry for SOC analyst roles, for obviously network engineering roles and internet engineering, but more and more for cyber operations as well. And so recently there have been at least 2 new certifications that Cisco has put forth. The first is the Cyber Ops Associate, which is a fairly straightforward software operations degree covering a lot of security concepts, monitoring, host-based analysis, network intrusion analysis, and so forth. There's also Cyber Ops Professional certification, which is for senior analysts really living in a security operations center, but really focused on those incident response roles and dealing with topics like cloud security and other active defense. And so I think more and more creating that pipeline, right, from classroom to career for folks through these kinds of platforms is going to be really important for us to achieve the kind of landscape of talent that we're going to need at scale. And so that's something that I encourage everybody, if you can, check out some of these programs, check out, and support the things that happen in your local communities, because we all have a hand in helping raise up the next generation of cyber technologists and enthusiasts.
Well, Doug Song, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for taking time to join us at Cybertalks. We really appreciate your insights today.
Great. Thank you, I appreciate it.